He was at Wembley on Sunday, one crutch, walking the pitch before the Carabao Cup final. And I want to talk about that image because when I saw it, and I know a lot of you saw it too, there was this immediate reaction, relief, hope, that feeling of, okay, he's getting there. And look, I get it. After everything that's happened this season, any positive news around Merino feels massive. But here's what I want to do today. I want to slow that reaction down, because when you actually look at what that image tells you, what it really tells you, the story becomes a lot more interesting and honestly a lot more important for Arsenal fans to understand. So let's get into it. Right, let's start with where we are. January 25th, Arsenal versus Manchester United at Old Trafford. Merino scores in a 3-2 defeat, and in that same game he picks up a bone stress fracture in his right foot. Now the thing about stress fractures, and this matters, is that they are not like muscle injuries. They don't have grey areas in the same way. You cannot just push through them with tape and painkillers. The bone has to heal. It has its own timeline, and that timeline does not care about cup finals, or it does not care about Champions League knockout rounds. Well, it heals when it heals. Arsenal confirmed the injury on the 1st of February. Surgery followed on the 10th of February. Arteta, when asked, gave the only honest answer he could give: 4 months. Now, 4 months from February puts us into June. Let that sit for a second. So then we get to Sunday, Merino at Wembley, one crutch, protective boot, walking the pitch. And within hours, the headline comes out. A source close to Merino has confirmed he'll be fit for the World Cup. And the internet reacts the way the internet always does. He's coming back. He'll be back for the run-in. Arsenal have hope. But here's the question I want you to sit with. If Mikel Merino is targeting fitness for the World Cup in June, let's take a look through this morning's newspapers, where Alexander Isak is dominating the majority of the back pages. This is the Daily Mail. Isak goes AWOL. They report that the Newcastle striker is in Spain alone, using the training facilities of his former club, Real Sociedad, while Newcastle are out in the Far East for their pre-season preparations. The paper say that Isak could face a club fine if he's left Tyneside without the knowledge of the club, and it comes as Newcastle insists he's not for sale, despite him being the prime target of Liverpool this summer. Because I think most people read that headline as good news for this season. I'm going to suggest to you that if you read it carefully, it's actually telling you something else entirely. Let me explain. When a player or a source close to a player confirms World Cup fitness, they're confirming a June timeline, not a May timeline, not an April timeline, June. And there's a specific reason that distinction matters. To be fit for a World Cup, you need to be in full training roughly 6 to 8 weeks before the tournament begins. That means Merino needs to be running training fully, building match sharpness around April or May at the very latest. But here's the medical reality. There is a significant difference between returning to full training and returning to competitive football. Those are two separate milestones. And the second one, match fitness, the ability to absorb contact, to sprint, to change direction under pressure on a football pitch, that comes weeks after full training begins. So when I hear World Cup fitness confirmed, my analytical brain does not hear April cameo at the Emirates. What I hear is late April return to training, May possible match availability if everything goes perfectly, World Cup in June. And that is the most optimistic reading. Arsenal fans need to understand that. Now let me be honest with you, because I know how this feels. I know you've been watching games this season thinking, if Merino was fit, that would be different. If Merino was available for that Carabao Cup final, who knows? And there is something genuinely difficult about watching your team go through the most important stretch of the season, missing the one player who makes your system most unpredictable. I get that. But here's what I also know. Arsenal will not rush this, and they shouldn't. Because a bone stress fracture that is pushed before full consolidation doesn't just risk this season, it risks next season, it risks the World Cup, it risks the long-term structural health of a 29-year-old midfielder who is absolutely central to what Arteta is building here. So if you're asking me, should Arsenal bring Merino back in the final 3 games of the Premier League just to say he played? My answer is no, absolutely not. And I think Arsenal's medical team would say exactly the same thing. But now I want to get into the part that I think matters most here, because the real question isn't about when Merino comes back. The real question isn't about when Merino comes back. And this is where it gets interesting, because on the surface, Arsenal have coped. They're 9 points clear in the Premier League, 9 points. So you could look at that and say, well, they haven't needed him. They've managed fine. And I'd push back on that, not because the numbers are wrong, but because 9 points clear tells you about results. It doesn't tell you about ceiling. That's the distinction. Here's what Mikel Merino gives Arteta that nobody else in this squad gives him. When Merino plays as a false nine, and he's done it repeatedly this season, something tactically extraordinary happens. Arsenal don't become a team with a striker, they become a team with 4 central midfielders disguised as 3. Think about what that means for an opposition defensive line. Your centre-backs are trained to hold their shape against a striker. They want a reference point, someone to track, someone to mark, someone to hold the line against. When Merino drops into that false nine role, he disappears on them. He pulls them out of position. He drags them into areas they don't want to go. And the moment he does that, the space opens up behind them for Saka, for Martinelli, for whoever is running beyond. It's not just a positional quirk, it's a tactical trap. And Arteta designed it that way. Now think about who covers that role without him. Havertz as the false nine, technically capable, intelligent player, no question. But here's the difference. When Havertz drops deep, he's a striker dropping deep. Opposition defenders read it differently. They track him, they stay tighter. The trap doesn't fully spring. Jotyo Kures is a centre forward, excellent at what he does. He presses, he holds, he finishes. But he's not a system manipulator. He's a goal scorer operating within the system. That is a completely different function. So what has Arsenal actually lost? They haven't just lost a midfielder. They haven't just lost a false nine. They've lost a tactical idea, one that made them genuinely unpredictable, one that opposition analysts now don't have to prepare for. And in the Champions League knockout rounds, where preparation is everything, where every detail of your opponent is analysed for days before kickoff, that tactical idea would have been genuinely dangerous. Now, while we're being honest about Arsenal's injury situation, Merino is the headline. But is he actually the most pressing concern right now? Let me give you the full picture. Odegaard, knee problem, close to returning. Saliba, ankle issue, withdrew from France duty, expected back soon. Gabriel, knee discomfort, withdrew from Brazil, expected back soon. Timber, ankle, withdrew from Netherlands, same story. Trossard, hip, withdrew from Belgium. And then there's Eberechi Eze, calf injury, potentially 4 to 6 weeks. Now think about that timeline. 4 to 6 weeks puts Eze right into the heart of Arsenal's Champions League push, FA Cup run and the decisive phase of the Premier League title race. Eze was signed specifically to provide creative depth in moments like these, the moments where the squad is stretched, where you need someone to come off the bench and change the game. And right now, that player is sat in a physio room with a calf problem. I want to ask you something. In a week where Merino's one crutch dominated the conversation, did you even notice how serious the Eze situation might be? Because that, to me, is the immediate concern. Now, the Carabao Cup final. I know it hurts. 2-0 to Manchester City at Wembley. Nobody wants to talk about it. But before we accept that result as a pure performance judgment on Arsenal, let's be real about the context. Arsenal went to Wembley without Merino, without Odegaard, with Eze not fully himself, with several players carrying knocks that are now confirmed issues. I'm not making excuses. Manchester City were better on the day. But when you're doing post-match analysis, context is not an excuse. It's evidence. And the evidence tells you that Arsenal faced one of the best teams in the world in a cup final, missing significant pieces of what makes them hard to play against. That's not a reason to dismiss the defeat, but it's a reason to be measured about what it tells you. Now, here's my actual take, my honest position on all of this. Arsenal should not play Merino again this season. There, I've said it. Not because he won't be available, not because the season is over, but because the risk simply isn't worth it. If you bring Merino back in April or May and he refractures that foot, you don't just lose the end of this season. You potentially lose him for the start of next season. You risk his World Cup. You risk a player who at 29 is in the peak years of his career. And for what? A cameo in a game Arsenal are probably going to win anyway if they're 9 points clear. The maths doesn't work. The medical logic doesn't support it. And I think Arsenal's medical team knows that better than anyone. But here's where I want to take this, because there is a bigger picture here that is genuinely exciting if you're an Arsenal fan. Forget the short term for a second. Forget the next 6 weeks. Think about what Mikel Merino looks like when he comes back fully fit, fully sharp after a summer at the World Cup. He's 29. He's in the form of his life before this injury. 6 goals, 3 assists this season from midfield, playing the best football of his career. And he comes back in pre-season fully healed, World Cup experience, fresh, ready to go from week 1. That is a different proposition. That is a player who walks back into this Arsenal side and immediately makes them tactically superior to what they are right now. and combined with whoever Arsenal bring in this summer, and you can be sure Arteta will be working on adding depth in midfield and attack, that becomes something genuinely threatening. There's another question underneath all of this too, one that I think will define the summer conversation around this club. If Arsenal win the Premier League this season, and right now they are in a very strong position to do that, what does it tell us that they won it without Merino in the second half of the campaign? Does it prove the squad is deep enough? Does it prove the system is bigger than any individual? Or does it create a harder question, one about whether Arsenal actually need to add another player capable of doing what Merino does so they're never this exposed again? Because that false nine tactical option, that midfield overload in disguise, you cannot have that be dependent on one player's availability. Not if you're genuinely chasing the biggest prizes, and Arteta knows that. So let me bring this back to where we started. Wembley, Sunday, one crutch, Merino walking that pitch, watching his teammates get ready to play a game he couldn't be part of. And I want you to think about what it took to be there. He didn't have to be. He's in a protective boot, still on a crutch, in the middle of a long recovery process. He could have stayed home. He chose to be at Wembley. But he chose to walk that pitch with his teammates. He chose to be present, and that matters. Not because it's sentimental, but because it is entirely consistent with the kind of player Mikel Merino is, a player who reads the game intelligently, a player who understands what his role is on the pitch and off it, a player who knows that being part of this group isn't just about the 90 minutes. One crutch at Wembley doesn't tell you when Mikel Merino comes back, but it tells you exactly what kind of player Arsenal will get back when he does. Now, I'll leave you with this, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Arsenal have a decision to make in the coming week. If Merino is medically cleared in late April, do you take the risk and bring him back for the final weeks of the season? Or do you protect him completely, let him build toward the World Cup, and trust that next season a fully fit, rested, sharp Mikel Merino is worth more than a few minutes in May? Drop your answer in the comments, because that is a genuinely interesting debate. And knowing this fan base, you'll have some strong opinions on it. I'm Amelia. This is Amelia Arsenal Update, and I'll see you in the next one.